You have been explaining yourself your entire life. Every argument you lost, you walked away and replayed it in your head, thinking about what you should have said, what you could have added, how you might have made them understand. And every single time, the explanation made it worse, not because you were wrong, but because you were playing a game you were never supposed to play. The moment you explain yourself to someone who has already decided how they see you, you have handed them the one thing they needed: proof that you can be controlled, proof that your emotions are accessible, proof that their opinion of you still has real estate inside your mind. You are not going to do that anymore. There is a different way to move through the world, a way that does not require you to defend, justify, or argue. A way where your silence says more than any speech you could give. A way where your disappearance becomes the most powerful statement you have ever made. Think about the last time someone at work took credit for something you built. You had two choices: confront them and look petty, or say nothing and look weak. You picked one. It didn't feel right. It never does. Think about the friend who dismissed you in a group, who laughed at your idea in front of others, who made you feel small on purpose. You went home that night and drafted the perfect response in your head. You never sent it, but you kept rehearsing it, days later, maybe weeks. Think about the family member who has a way of finding your exact nerve and pressing it until you explode. And then, once you explode, you become the problem. You become the one who is dramatic, unstable, too sensitive. They lit the fire, and somehow you are holding the matches. This is not an accident. These people, consciously or not, understand something about power that you were never taught. And the man who understood it most clearly lived 500 years ago in Florence, Italy, watching empires rise and collapse from his window. Niccolo Machiavelli was a diplomat, a strategist, and one of the most precise observers of human nature who ever lived. He was born in 1469, worked inside the Florentine Republic, watched princes gain and lose everything based on their choices, and wrote it all down in a single document that has terrified and fascinated the powerful ever since. He called it The Prince. And what he described was not cruelty. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that most people never develop because they are too busy reacting, explaining, and defending to ever truly think. Today, you will discover the 7 dark psychology principles that Machiavelli, history, and modern behavioral science agree are the most powerful weapons a person can carry. These are not about aggression. They are not about cruelty. They are about removing yourself from the battlefield in a way that leaves your opponent with nothing to hit, nothing to hold, and no version of you they can predict or control. Once you understand these 7 principles, the way you see people will never be the same. You cannot go back to being naive after this. You cannot unsee what you are about to see. If you want to stay comfortable, stop now. But if you are ready to understand the game at a level most people never reach, stay. Before we begin, drop this in the comments right now. I do not react. I do not explain. I build in silence. That is not a slogan. That is a new operating system. Write it and mean it before we go any further. The silence that commands rooms. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the concentrated form of it. Machiavelli once wrote, "He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command." And the highest form of command is not volume. It is restraint. The person who can sit in tension without reaching for words to fill it, that person owns the room. Most people do not understand this because they have been trained from childhood to equate silence with weakness. You do not speak, you must not know, You do not respond. You must be afraid. But this is exactly backwards from how power actually operates. In 63 BCE, the man who would become Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome and the architect of an empire that lasted centuries, was advised by his personal philosopher Athenodorus to never say or do anything in anger until he had recited the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet. When the philosopher tried to leave Rome and return home in his old age, Augustus seized his hand and made him stay one more year. The reason Augustus gave was documented by Plutarch in the Moralia. No risk attends the reward that silence brings. Augustus did not build an empire through spectacle. He built it through restraint. Where Julius Caesar had conquered with speed and force and paid for it with 23 stab wounds on the floor of the Senate, Augustus governed by minimizing friction, appearing harmless while consolidating absolute power. He understood that visibility invites opposition. Silence denies them a target. Most people, when they feel threatened or dismissed, begin to speak. They explain. They justify. They raise their voice to fill the room. The strategic person does the opposite. They go still. They listen. They let the other person move, expose themselves, overextend, and then they act from a position of total information while the other person is operating on pure emotion. Here is why this works at a neurological level. When you stay silent under social pressure, the other person's brain reads the absence of a response as uncertainty. The brain hates uncertainty more than it hates bad news. Neuroscientist Tali Sharot at University College London has documented how the brain will generate anxiety in proportion to the unpredictability of a social situation. When you are completely unpredictable, when you say nothing, show nothing, react to nothing, you become the single most disturbing presence in the interaction. Not because you are threatening, because you cannot be mapped. Picture this. A colleague sends you a passive-aggressive email in front of the whole team. Every instinct in your body wants to reply immediately and set the record straight. You do not. You read it. You close the email, you continue your day. 3 hours later, you walk into a meeting and sit next to that person and say nothing about it. You are polite, you are calm, you are completely, infuriatingly normal. By the end of the day, that person has spent more time thinking about your non-reaction than they spent writing the original email. They cannot read you. They cannot predict what you know, what you are planning, what you are going to do. That uncertainty will eat them alive. This is not about cruelty. It is about refusing to be a predictable instrument that others can play whenever they choose. The disappearance that creates desire. When you are always available, you become furniture. When you disappear, you become a question mark. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you." What he understood 5 centuries ago, behavioral scientist Robert Cialdini documented in formal psychological research in the 20th century. Scarcity creates value. The scarcity principle, one of the most reliably documented findings in social psychology, holds that people assign higher value to things that are limited in availability. This is not a preference. It is a neurological response. When the brain detects scarcity, it does not simply update its preferences. It activates loss aversion, the same fear circuitry that responds to physical danger. What might be lost suddenly feels more important than anything currently in hand. This applies to goods, it applies to opportunities, and it applies to people. Augustus Caesar understood this instinctively. Historians at Vocal Media and other classical scholars have noted that his genius lay not in dramatic battlefield heroics, but in knowing when not to act and when to let others believe nothing had changed while he moved everything. He governed from the position of seeming absence. He did not appear to rule, he appeared to serve. That concealment of presence was the source of his authority. People could not get a clean read on him, and that made them profoundly attentive to every rare signal he did give. Most people, when they feel themselves losing influence in a relationship or a social situation, begin to show up more. They call more. They text more. They find reasons to be present. Every appearance of this kind confirms their diminished value. The strategic person does the exact opposite. They become harder to reach. Not out of spite, not as a game, but as a deliberate recalibration of value. The withdrawal is real. The focus turns inward. The silence is filled with work, growth, and forward movement that has nothing to do with the person being left without access. When you withdraw your presence from someone who took it for granted, their psychological immune system does not simply adjust and move on. Research on social bonding, including work by Robin Dunbar's group at the University of Oxford, shows that humans are highly attuned to the absence of people who were previously part of their social environment. A presence that suddenly vanishes triggers what researchers describe as social compensation behavior. The brain drives the person to increase investment in the relationship specifically because the relationship now feels threatened. The less available you are, the more valuable your presence becomes. A concrete application. You have a friend who cancels on you repeatedly, who always makes plans and then disappears when something better comes along. You have explained how this makes you feel. Nothing changes. The strategic move is not another conversation. It is withdrawal. You stop initiating. You are polite when they reach out but genuinely unavailable. You are building something. You have somewhere to be. 3 weeks in, they begin noticing. A month in, they are rescheduling things for you. 6 weeks in, your time is the scarce resource, and they are treating it accordingly. Drop this in the comments. My presence is a privilege, not a given. Never explain after the act. The moment you explain yourself, you downgrade yourself. Explanations are issued by people who feel they need to justify their existence to the room. Sovereign people do not explain, they act, and let the act stand. Machiavelli once wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." This is the core mechanics of power in every social and professional environment. The surface, what people see, is the entire game for most observers. They do not have access to your intentions, your full reasoning, your private context. They have only what is visible. When you explain yourself, you are attempting to correct the surface image. But explanations have a hidden cost. They reveal that the surface image matters to you. They reveal that you are worried. They reveal that the audience's interpretation has power over your emotional state. Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, the man Machiavelli met personally during his diplomatic missions and whom he declared the best example of a new prince in the prince, understood this completely. When Borgia lured his rebellious captains to a meeting in the city of Senigallia in 1502 and had them arrested and executed, he offered no public justification, no lengthy statement, no appeal to the sensibilities of observers. The act was the message. As Machiavelli documented, The move terrified and simultaneously reassured the population of Romagna. The ruthless efficiency of the act communicated everything that needed to be communicated. Borgia did not need to explain it, because his actions had an internal logic that anyone watching could read. When you explain, you signal that you are not sure the logic was visible. When you remain silent after an act, you signal total confidence in its rightness. Most people, when challenged, begin to explain their choices. They trace the reasoning backward. They show their work. They present evidence. They appeal to the other person's sense of fairness. The strategic person does none of this. They make a decision. They act on it. When questioned, they acknowledge the question and do not fill the silence that follows. Here is what happens at a psychological level when you explain yourself under pressure. Research on social judgment documents what psychologists call the explanation bias, the tendency for explanations to be interpreted not as clarification, but as admission. In courtroom psychology, legal scholars have noted for decades that a defendant who explains too much is often perceived as less credible, not more. The over-explanation signals anxiety. Anxiety signals awareness of guilt. The brain makes this connection even when no guilt exists. The concrete scenario. Your manager challenges a decision you made in front of the team. Every instinct says to explain your reasoning in detail. You do not. You say, "I made that call based on what I knew. If there is information I'm missing, I want to hear it." Then you stop. You look at them. You wait. The burden has now shifted. They must now provide the information or acknowledge that the challenge was not substantive. Either way, you have not apologized for existing. The emotion they cannot reach. The person who controls their emotional response controls the entire interaction. No exceptions. Machiavelli once wrote, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." The deeper principle here is that external forces, other people's labels, provocations, attacks, carry only the weight you assign them. The title only has power if the man holding it gives it power. The insult only lands if the target picks it up. This is not a modern insight. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor who ruled Rome from 161 to 180 CE and wrote the private journal now known as the Meditations, described emotional non-reaction as the highest form of strength a person could develop. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wrote. "Realize this, and you will find strength." His reign was marked by extraordinary external pressure, wars on multiple fronts, a devastating plague, constant political intrigue. He documented in the Meditations that his daily practice was to remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult, hostile, and irrational people, and that their behavior had no power over his inner state unless he permitted it. The research supports this with precision. Studies on the cortisol stress response, including work published in journals such as Psychoneuroendocrinology, consistently show that the individuals who maintain the lowest cortisol reactivity during social confrontation are not the ones who are emotionally numb. They are the ones who have developed what researchers call cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reframe a threatening social situation as non-threatening in real time. This is a trainable skill, and the people who master it consistently outperform peers in high-pressure environments because their cognitive resources are not diverted by the physiological cost of emotional reactivity. Most people, when they feel provoked, allow the provocation to become the event. The heat in their chest, the tightening in the jaw, the impulse to respond, these take over. The strategic person treats the provocation as data. Something just happened. It is information about the person across from them. It tells them how that person operates, what they are afraid of, where they think the pressure points are. The strategic person receives this information without reacting to it and files it for later use. The scenario: someone at a dinner, perhaps a family member or an old friend who has not let go of an old grievance, makes a pointed remark designed to diminish you in front of others. Everyone at the table watches to see how you respond. You look at them calmly. You nod slightly, as if acknowledging they spoke. You say nothing. You pick up your glass. You ask the person next to you a question about something completely different. The conversation moves. You have denied the provocateur the reaction they came for, and you have demonstrated to everyone watching that this person does not have the ability to destabilize you. That demonstration is worth more than any comeback you could have delivered. Drop this in the comments. Nothing outside me controls my state. I am the architect of my response, the ghost that builds empires. The most dangerous people in any room are not the loudest. They are the ones you cannot read. Machiavelli once wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves." The fox does not announce its intelligence. It does not signal its next move. It moves in ways that cannot be predicted, cannot be tracked, cannot be anticipated. That unpredictability is the source of its power. When Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple by the board in 1985 at age 30, after having built the company from a garage, he did not respond with a public campaign to restore his reputation. He did not hold press conferences. He did not flood the media with statements. He disappeared into his next project. He built next. He purchased what would become Pixar. He worked in the background for 12 years. When Apple was 2 months from bankruptcy in 1997 and the board brought him back, he returned not as a man who had been humiliated and was seeking redemption, but as a man who had been learning at a level no one could see. He cut Apple's product line from 350 products down to 10. He removed everything that was not essential. He brought radical focus and discipline to a company that had lost its identity. Within 2 years, Apple was profitable. Within a decade, it was the most valuable company in the world. He had spent 12 years becoming something. The return was not a comeback. It was a reveal. Most people, when removed from power, make the mistake of fighting to restore the visible symbol of what they lost: the title, the position, the recognition. The strategic person uses the exile to build what cannot be taken away: capacity, clarity, and a next move that no one sees coming. Here is the psychological principle underlying this. Research in behavioral science on what psychologists call loss aversion, documented extensively by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their landmark work on prospect theory, shows that humans feel the pain of loss approximately twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This means that when you are publicly diminished, every instinct in the body pushes you toward immediate recovery action. The strategic person overrides this impulse. They recognize that the impulse to react immediately is the trap. The fox in the trap does not thrash. It goes still. It thinks. It moves when the moment is right, not when the wound is fresh. The concrete application. You have been passed over for a promotion that should have been yours. Everyone knows it was political. You are furious. You have 2 choices: respond visibly, resign dramatically, complain loudly. make your grievance known, and confirm that you can be destabilized. Or you go quiet. You become exceptional. You document everything you do. You build relationships outside the company. You create options. You become the person that the company cannot afford to lose, at which point the negotiation happens entirely on your terms, or you leave on your schedule, not theirs. The weapon of total withdrawal. Not every battle deserves your presence. Most don't. The supreme strategic act is to refuse the battlefield entirely. Machiavelli once wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." The deeper principle is that engaging on the enemy's chosen terms is already a concession. When someone provokes you into a fight in their preferred arena, an emotional argument, a public confrontation, a war of words, they have already won the position. They have chosen the ground. They have chosen the weapons. Even if you win the argument, you have lost strategically because you accepted their framing of the contest. The most documented use of this principle in modern history, outside of classical military strategy, is found in the behavior of people who survive institutional betrayal and professional manipulation by simply removing themselves from the system entirely. Robert Greene, in his analysis of historical power dynamics, documented the pattern across dozens of historical figures. Those who learned when to completely exit a situation gained far more than those who stayed and fought. The ones who fought on the enemy's territory exhausted themselves and legitimized the conflict. The ones who withdrew forced the enemy to fight an absence, which is impossible to defeat. The psychological mechanism is this: when you engage with a conflict, you validate it. You signal to both the opponent and every observer that this conflict is worth your energy and attention. That signal elevates the conflict's importance. It also locks you into the role of combatant, which means any move you make, even a winning one, is measured within the framework of the conflict. But when you withdraw entirely, you eliminate the framework. There is no longer a conflict to win or lose because there is no longer a second party on the battlefield. The opponent is left swinging at air. Here is what dark psychology reveals about why total withdrawal is so psychologically disturbing to people who depend on reaction. Research on ostracism, studied extensively by social psychologist Kipling Williams at Purdue University, shows that being ignored is processed by the brain as a fundamental threat to social existence. The same neural pathways that activate in response to physical pain activate when a person is systematically ignored. This is not a metaphor. The brain does not distinguish cleanly between social exclusion and physical harm. When you withdraw entirely and refuse to engage, not out of obvious anger, but with calm, deliberate absence, you are triggering one of the most profound discomfort responses in human psychology. And you are doing it without a single confrontational act. The scenario. There is a person in your life, an ex-colleague, a former friend, a rival, who has been running a quiet campaign to undermine your reputation in shared social circles. Confronting them directly hands them exactly what they want, a drama they can narrate. Instead, you remove them from your environment. You stop attending events where they will be present. You stop responding to mutual friends who attempt to draw you into the conflict. You redirect your entire social energy elsewhere. Within months, the absence of your reaction has become the statement. Everyone who was watching has noticed that you moved on and thrived, while the other person is still managing a conflict with no second party. Drop this in the comments. I choose my battles, and I win by not showing up to the wrong ones. The return that rewrites everything. Disappearing is the preparation. The return is the power. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men are so simple of mind and so much dominated by their immediate needs that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived." Read this not as cynicism, but as a description of how most people operate, at the surface level, in response to what is immediate and visible. The person who withdraws, builds, and returns, transformed, has an extraordinary advantage over them. The people they left behind are still exactly where you left them. You are not. Augustus Caesar provides the clearest historical example of a strategic return. Born Gaius Octavius in 63 BCE, he entered Rome's political arena as a completely dismissed figure. After Julius Caesar's assassination, every serious power player dismissed him as irrelevant. Mark Antony mocked him publicly. Cicero called him a tool to be used and discarded. What Augustus did in the years that followed was methodical and invisible. He built alliances, positioned himself as a guardian of Roman tradition, allowed rivals to overextend and expose themselves, and then moved decisively at the precise moment the position was his. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE ended the Republic. Augustus was 32 years old. He would rule Rome for 44 years. The people who dismissed him became footnotes. Most people, when forced out of a situation, return desperately, hungry to prove something, eager to reclaim lost status. The strategic person returns on entirely different terms. They return when they are ready, on a timeline they control, having built something in the absence that makes the question of former status irrelevant. The return is not a restoration. It is a restructuring. Research on what psychologists call self-concept clarity, a stable, coherent sense of identity, consistently shows that people who develop it during periods of pressure and withdrawal are far more resistant to social manipulation and far better at long-term strategic execution. The disappearance consolidates the self. When you return with that clarity, you walk into a room full of people still operating on their last version of you. That version no longer exists. The update is uncomfortable for them and completely natural for you. The concrete scenario. You left a situation, a job, a relationship, a circle, under circumstances that felt like loss. You spent months working, growing skills, building resources, clarifying direction. Then the moment arrives to re-enter. You walk in differently. Not because you perform differently, because you are different. The people there try to place you in the frame they remember. It does not fit. They have to revise their entire understanding of you. That revision is the return. The disappearance was the work that made it possible. Drop this in the comments. I disappeared so I could return different. I am not who they remember. Let us move fast. Principle 1. Silence commands rooms. The person who can sit in tension without reacting owns the dynamic. Principle 2. Disappearance creates desire. When you become scarce, you become valuable. Withdrawal is not defeat. It is repositioning. Principle 3. Never explain after the act. Explanations signal anxiety. Sovereign people let the act stand and let observers draw their own conclusions. Principle 4. Master the emotion they cannot reach. Your emotional state is your sovereignty. When they cannot provoke you, they cannot control you. Principle 5. The ghost builds empires. Move in silence, develop in private. Return transformed. The exit was never the ending. It was the beginning of the real preparation. Principle 6. The weapon of total withdrawal. Refuse the battlefield. Deny the enemy a target. The absence itself is the most powerful statement you can make. Principle 7. The return rewrites everything. Disappearance is preparation. The return, on your own terms, with what you built in the silence, that is the move that changes everything. You are not the same person who started this video. You came in here thinking about how to respond better, how to defend yourself more effectively, how to win the arguments you have been losing. You are leaving with something different, the understanding that the game is not won by reacting, explaining, or fighting. It is won by becoming so clear, so focused, so genuinely difficult to provoke or predict, that the people who expected you to stay small have to completely recalibrate their understanding of who they are dealing with. They thought you were someone they could read. You are done being readable. They thought you were someone who would explain yourself when challenged. That version of you does not exist anymore. They thought disappearing you would diminish you. It made you. Now drop this final affirmation in the comments and mean every word. I do not react. I do not explain. I disappeared to become something they were not prepared for. And I am just getting started. If this changed the way you see the world, hit like, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to stop reacting and start building. We are just getting started, and the next video goes even deeper into how Machiavelli's principles of silence and strategic patience have been the hidden operating system of every person who has ever built real, lasting power. Do not miss it.